My name is John Snyder. I am currently the program director for music industry studies at Loyola University in New Orleans. Before that, and even at this point, I'm a music producer. I produce a lot of CDs and DVD reissues, and CD reissues and also DVDs. I've been extremely lucky in my associations, having worked with many of the top jazz artists, as well as a number of contemporary artists like Stevie Wonder or Paul Simon or Eric Clapton, mostly as they made guest appearances with artists that I produced that they were concerned about, that they actually loved, and so they would sing or play on the records that I produced to show their respect for these people. I've been fortunate to produce records. Of the 300 or so new records that I produced, I think 34 received Grammy nominations and 5 have won Grammys, which is not hard to do if you work with top people. And I think that that's one of the keys to success, actually, is just try to work with the top people. Some of the artists that I've actually produced, I kind of bridged the gap between the avant-garde of Ornette Coleman and Cecil Taylor and Sun Ra, Don Cherry, and artists like that, to people like Bobby Short, King of the Cabaret, or Jerry Mulligan, or Dave Brubeck, or Chet Baker. I've worked with Stan Getz, Frank Morgan, Paul Desmond. It's a long list. It's actually hard to believe, but looking back on it. But like I said, I've been really lucky. I was always a musician. That was my life from the time I was probably 6, and I was forced to take piano lessons, and then I was forced to take trumpet lessons, and then I was forced to get up every morning at 6 o'clock and practice both, and I got good at it. And so once you get good at something, and people take notice of that, it's almost, then you have something you have to kind of protect and perfect. So I did, and and I became a very good player, mostly because I was one of the few kids that would practice during the summer. My old man would kick my butt to make me practice, so I became to the point, it would cross the line between something I had to do to something I wanted to do. And when that crossed that line, then it was my life and not his. And so I crossed that line probably when I was 12 or 13. And that was what I did every night, every day after school. I did what I carried the newspapers or whatever I had to do. And then I would go to my room and study and practice and listen to music. And that was it. And so it came time to go to college, and I wanted to go to music school. So I announced that to my father, and he promptly reprimanded me and said, "There is no way." And I was a little confused by that, because I said, "Well, why did you wake me up every morning to practice the instrument?" And he said, "That was just for something to do. This is a job in life, and that's music. Music is not the answer. You can't make a living at it," which kind of actually began the whole rest of my life right there. Well, yeah, I think you can. And I proved it by working my way through college as a musician. He didn't pay for my college education, and because it wasn't something he favored. So I had 3 scholarships in college, and I had a band, and actually got some gigs where we actually went on tour in Europe and Japan and other places during the summers. So I got to kind of lead this band. It was mostly as a result of, I just took the responsibility of doing it, and I did it, and booked the gigs and whatever. So I got knowledgeable about the way the business worked just from doing it in college. And I was in a summer school course in criminology, just to take something to get through, and just an elective I had to satisfy. and the teacher suggested that I go to law school after reading a paper that I wrote, and I thought that was pretty nutty, you know, having been a musician all my life, and really not another thought in my head. I was going to be a trumpet player. That was my thing, and I wanted to be the lead player in the Count Basie band. If I could do that, my life would be complete. So I wanted to be in New York City. But, you know, I got to play a lot of shows in college. I played the Sonny and Cher show and the Isaac Hayes show and all the circus shows and the ice shows and all that. I was kind of one of the first call players for that region of North Carolina. So I got to play a lot of the shows that passed through. Brenda Lee, you know, I mean, all kinds of stuff. And it was just a great experience. You know, you get to play in all those different situations. Nowadays, the circus music is canned. But in those days, they hired bands, you know, and it was not easy music. It was quite challenging. But it was just great fun, you know, you can imagine. Anyway, so I did go to law school. I was convinced to go by the people that ran the law school to actually provide a certain diversity in the population, which at that point was mostly Caucasian males who graduated from economics and political science departments. And so they needed diversity, and I supplied the weirdo quotient, is what they called it, because I was a musician. And I went and didn't really love it, but did it, and did pretty well at it after the first year. And first year I kind of got bummed out with it and slept through a lot of it. But after being challenged by my dean, you know, I expected more from you. I expected more from you too. And so we made a deal, and I did better. And after it came close to graduation time, and then you know, it was now payday. So what do you do? And everybody was interviewing with law firms and insurance agencies and all this crazy stuff, banks. And I knew this wasn't my life. You know, I didn't even like the way it felt to button the top button of the shirt. So I wrote in an effort to get out of North Carolina, I wrote every entertainment law firm in New York City, every law firm in New York City that specialized in entertainment law. There's a book of lawyers, Martindale Hubbell, that provides this information. So I just went to the library, got it, and wrote it down, and wrote all these letters. I think there were 76 of them at that point, and I wrote one record producer in addition to those law firms, and he wrote me back. It was the era where people actually wrote letters and typed letters. We had these things called stamps. You know, you make them and mail something, and so he wrote me back and suggested I come next time I'm in New York, come see him. Well, I wasn't really a frequent visitor to New York, so I just got in the car and drove up there. And I've always been somebody to do that. I'm kind of instant response kind of guy. It's like I see something to do, I just go do it. And so I saw 3 or 4 law firms, and I knew that wasn't going to work for me. So I then saw him, and it was, you know, I knew more about him than he knew about him. I mean, I remembered all of his records. I could talk about any track on any record. And he was quite surprised by that, because I was reminding him of records he'd forgotten about. And then he asked me who I would sign, and if I could. And I told him 3 artists, and he was signing 2 of them. So that kind of worked out. And he hired me on the spot. He asked me how much money Wall Street was paying, and I had no thought that I'd ever get Wall Street money, but I told him, and he said, I can pay that. And he did. And so I went to work for him a couple of months after that. The only stipulation was that I passed the bar exam, which I did. It was, you know, it's hard. And I took a night course every night after work during that first summer. And the bar exam was at the end of the summer, as I remember. And got through it okay. So I ran his publishing companies, and then he pulled me into more other functions as time went on. Maybe it was Paul Desmond and Dave Brubeck duet record. But I did a number of records at CTI that I didn't know what I was doing, but the boss wouldn't show up, so I did the records. You know, like I arranged for a record at Carnegie Hall with the Jerry Mulligan group and Chet Baker. Now, Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker had a famous quartet in the 50s. They had fallen out of touch and really weren't that close. But I kind of brought Chet Baker back into the game. He'd been in ill health and had his teeth knocked out and stuff in a fight. So, but a friend of mine kept bringing me tapes, and finally I persuaded my boss to sign Chet Baker, and we kind of got him back to health. And then I made this connection with Jerry Mulligan, and actually ended up managing both of those artists later on. But I did this recording date at Carnegie Hall. I was probably 25 or something, and it was really just because my boss didn't show up for it. You know, it wasn't a big deal. You just hire a recording truck and talk about the songs, and you know, these are big time guys. You know, I wasn't really having a major influence on that record. It was just really just make it happen and try not to screw it up. So I don't think I even got credit for it, you know. But I didn't care about that. So I did a number of things like that for Creed. It depends on the genre, and it depends on the artist. And but one thing I think that's characteristic of the process is that the producer is the first audience, and so it's an interesting experience where you get to listen to music for the first time as it's being created, then actually you can respond to it and have something to say about it. It's kind of Walter Mitty-ish in the sense that you can close your eyes and listen to music, and then you can open your eyes and suggest that the drummer go to the ride cymbal at the tenor solo or whatever, and that you can ask the bass player to walk that pattern rather than play 2 and 4, whatever. It's also a logistical matter. It's also a kind of a psychological matter. I mean, most of the work of producing a record happens before you get to the studio. So pre-production is kind of the essence of it. You get it together, you know what you're going to do, you have your plan, and you also know that executing that plan in a recording studio is a very expensive process. So in those days, before the advent of home studios and Pro Tools and all that, it was expensive. And that was one of the barriers to entry, why so few people made records unless they were signed to a record company, because only a record company could afford to pay for it. So there was no independent artist in the 1970s. So, you know, I saw the producer's job as really, if you're making jazz records with great jazz artists, they kind of know what they want to do, and they're not really going to listen too much to you. But they will. I mean, I've had experiences sitting right next to Dave Brubeck, and he's playing his song, and then he stops and he says, looks right at me and says, "How was that?" So you've got to have something to say when somebody says that. I mean, Paul Simon did the same thing. How was that? You know, it's like it's a big question. And you can't just say that was good, let's try another one. So the idea with producing, for me, is feeling and thinking at the same time. So I was trained as a musician, considered myself a musician, and that's really more of a creative process. It's a creative way of thinking and being, and so you're sensitive on a different level than if you're a lawyer, which I was also, and trained in that way of thinking. So that's the analytical side. That's the side of taking something apart and examining the pieces of it and in depth, and then putting it back together again or changing it somehow. So in producing, for me, it's kind of an interesting proposition where you're thinking, working, trying to get all these people into this space, you know, getting all the travel arrangements made and all the money things are taken care of, and everybody's kind of cooled out. And then when push your red button and the music starts, then you've got to stop thinking and start feeling. And if you get goosebumps, you don't have to think about it anymore. But if you don't get goosebumps, then what? And then you've got to be able to verbalize that and make suggestions on how you can get your goosebumps. You know, it's a little bit weird to be able to make intellectual suggestions on how to create an emotional response. So that's a part of it. Paul Simon has a big ego, but he's also one of the greatest songwriters who ever lived. So he's kind of entitled. Dave Brubeck is an innocent, almost childlike person. Even though he's 88 years old or 87 years old at this point, he's still got that same kind of openness. Like everything is surprise. He's surprised by everything. It's like he is so anxious to be alive. You know, it's a beautiful thing to see. Paul Desmond was more of an intellectual, but it's true. You know, I'm not going to add a lot to what these people already do. Occasionally, you find that you can, you know, especially after they trust you for a while, and it's a matter of compatibility, and it's a matter of material. It's a matter of what kind of record are we going to make. I was making a Brubeck record one time, and the alto player was very upset because he thought the engineer was not being responsive to his needs. You know, this is not my sound. And the engineer was very convinced that the way he had mic'd it was correct. So they were arguing. And so Dave leaves the room because he's not somebody he doesn't want to be around that kind of strife. And so that this is where the psychology of producing comes into play, you know. And the engineer, I couldn't just say to him, do what I tell you, because if you will, then I'll get us through this problem. So the way I handled it was, you know, you've got to show respect. So go into the booth, take the alto player, and move the mics out of the way, and then say, now, how would you like this set up? And then he tells you. And then, okay, you do it just like he tells you, and then you record it. And then you say to him, did that sound like you wanted it to sound? He said, well, no, not quite. So then you adjust it. And you go through that process. It'll take you 15 minutes. And you keep playing and messing with it. And at the end of the 15 minutes, it's back the same way you had it. So you got what you wanted. The alto player got what he wanted because he just wanted something to say about it and to be convinced that he had gotten what he was looking for. And so there was no change. It was just a process. So the process is important. You know, it's it's necessary to create this environment of comfort and security, because what you're doing is you're creating an illusion. In the studio, you're recording music, jazz and blues and gospel. The musics that I was involved with are basically live musics. You know, they're not, you don't record this track and then this track and this track and layer the music. It's not like that. Some genres it is like that, but it's not in the genres that I work in. And so how the artist feels is very important to the result. And it's difficult to cause people to reach their creative peak in this very sterile environment. There's no audience to give feedback. And an audience can really make an artist, you know, there's a relationship between an audience and an artist that can really make something happen that's magical. For every artist, this is true. I mean, the Rolling Stones can have a better night if the audience is right there with them, and a worse night if they're not. So it's very important to get that, to help the artist to feel comfortable so they can get to this level that they need to get to, because this thing is forever, this thing they're going to do. And, you know, oftentimes I found myself in the situation where the band or the orchestra, the group, or the artist was not in the most comfortable situation, that there was something else happening in their lives or something that was in the way. And it could have been an engineer, it could have been the food, it could have been the trip in, it could have been the wife phone call, it could be all kinds of things. So how do you deal with that? And one of the aspects of producing for me is to always be aware of what it is that you're doing. And so I say to the musicians, if we're having a problem, you know, isn't it interesting that we woke up this morning and nothing existed, and we go to bed tonight and 5 songs or 6 or 4 exist on tape, any one of which has the potential of affecting people's lives in a positive way, if not changing the world. And the reason this is not an extreme concept is because we've all felt it. We have all felt it. So we know it exists. So that's quite a power, you know, the power of music and art to affect people's lives in a positive way. That's why we do what we do. Because what's better than that? I mean, medical research, feeding the hungry, there's a few things that, you know, but that's a pretty big power. So, you know, to have that power is a genuine luxury. You know, to have that ability is something that not everybody has. And if you have it, you have to be grateful for having it, and you have a responsibility to that power. And that usually works. You know, people usually respond to that because, yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm not kidding here, you know. And so you can't lose a record date. You know, somebody's putting up a good deal of money to make that happen. So you have to respect that money. But the way you respect it is to deliver something that actually contains that magic. And so it's the commerce of magic, or the magic of commerce. I don't know what it is. The two things come together. It's art and commerce together. But you can't have one without the other, I don't think. Well, you know, you can't change it. You can't fake it. You know, so it's either there or it's not there. But it's like Michelangelo said about the sculpture, you know, it's in the stone. All I have to do is find it. So it sounds obvious and simple. There is this block of marble. It is in there. But finding it is the trick, you know. So, you know, how do you do that? And usually what I try to do is, if I'm working with musicians that I'm not that familiar with, or that they're the kind of people who have been dealt and I don't have a lot of choice in who they are, I try to identify really quickly while they're rehearsing and setting up what they do well, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And then the first chance you get is you compliment them on something they do well. And I do it personally. You know, if the drummer did something that I thought was, you know, that fill you did between the second and third choruses, man, that was great. And so that shows him two things. As long as you're not faking it, it shows him two things. One is that you know, and second, you're paying attention, and 3, you're appreciative of it. And so it also has a certain flip side to it, which means if you have a problem, then you can go to that person and say, would you mind doing this? And they say, yeah. So the idea is you kind of steer away from their weaknesses, you know, and really go to their strengths. Occasionally you have to replace somebody because your obligation is to the result. It's not necessarily to the musician. I mean, it's commerce, you know. Somebody's putting up the money, it has to be right. And I can't let a bad bass player go through the process just because I don't want to hurt his feelings. It's not really fair to him or to the people that are going to buy that record. So you do what you can, but if you can't solve the problem, then you just have to stop it and make a change. That's the trick. You know, that's tough. Even Stevie Wonder had a producer. I mean, I think that it's often true that an artist is not necessarily the best judge of their own work. It's hard to be the artist and the audience at the same time. The Rolling Stones seem to be able to get by with it, but they're not many. You know, I think that a good producer can really help. It can help shape it. It can help give it's a view of the music that can presumably elevate it into a more polished, almost commercial product. I don't look at music as a product, but the people who sell it do. And generally, my role as producer was to be able to communicate between the artist and the money people who really don't talk well together. The record company people, the so-called suits, don't really have the language of the artist. And that's also, the reverse of that is true. There's exceptions, but basically the producer is kind of like the middleman, and it can speak all the languages. I know all the languages. I can talk the music language, I can talk the marketing language, I can talk the money language, I can talk the technology language. It's just, that's kind of another role of a producer, to be able to navigate those various worlds that are involved in the production and the selling of music. So I think that producers can get in the way, but the idea is to find a producer that's almost like a fifth member of the band, or an additional member of the band, who is so involved in the music. But recordings and the structures of selling art are not necessarily the things that are the first thing in the mind of the artist, because that person just wants to play or write or sing. But the producer is almost the guy or the girl that provides the frame for that. And I think it was C.K. Chesterton said that the essence of art is the frame. It contains it, it gives it structure. And without structure, the sky's the limit. It's hard to figure out what to do. Time provides structure. The musicians provide a structure. There's a lot of things that influence the structure. So the idea also in producing is to give the feeling that the time does not matter. We're here to create. It's not a matter of we have to be out of here by 5 o'clock. But the fact of the matter is, you may have to be out of there at 5 o'clock, and your money runs out. So it's really, I can remember many times being in a recording date and just being completely beside myself with anxiety because the money is spinning by so fast, and these guys are just totally unfocused. So, but you have to, there's a flow, there's a rhythm to it. There's a rhythm to everything. And so once you tap into that rhythm, you can use it to your advantage and to make music. And, but you have to be sensitive to that. And if you get uptight, they'll get uptight. And if they get uptight, you're not going to get the best music. You can get music that you can put out, and maybe some people won't know, but I think people know. I think we all know. When we hear something that really affects us, we know. So you can't really fake that. Well, I don't know. Kind of blue. There's genres. I love classical music too. I love some country music. I like the old-fashioned, authentic. I don't like commercial pop country. I don't know how to relate to that. But I love, for example, I love Mozart. I love, there's a work that I really love. It's so deep, and it speaks to me for some reason. It's the last 4 songs of Richard Strauss. Strauss had his issues as a person, being a Nazi sympathizer, but he, as a composer, and an artist, he was transcendent in many ways. And those last 4 songs, which are written towards the end of his life, and the text is from Hermann Hesse and other German poets. It's just very heavy music, and that reaches me. I like the Beethoven late quartets, Opus 130, 131, 132, and I think there's a molto adagio in 132 that's just unbelievable. That's the closest music to ascendancy into heaven. It's like unbelievable. But so much music. I can't. I can't say. I mean, you know, there's so many classic rock records that are great, so many artists. I'm a jazz guy.
Right.
I like trumpet players. Clifford Brown, you know. You can put anything by Clifford Brown and I'm good. Lack of preparation is a common problem because a lot of people have the notion that you create the music in the studio. And that's not really, that's only true for Led Zeppelin. You know, if you can spend millions of dollars and just, well, we don't know what we're doing, but we're going to start now. And then you start. But you're paying out a lot of money to rehearse and to figure things out. But again, that, for those guys, that became the structure. That's how they did it. You know, they knew that's how they did. They went to the studio. Now, Jimmy Page probably had figured some things out before he got there. But I know from people who were there that this could be a year-long idea, a problem to solve. And so they keep spending money, spending money, spending money. That's only available to certain people. And now it's available to nobody. Those days are over. I think that that you have to keep in mind that your music is not for you, it's for an audience. There's an implication of commerce in that, but you know, that's not why you're doing it. Artists never do that. They do not do something for the money. The money is a byproduct of what they do. I mean, that's the way I think it should be. I guess there are exceptions to it. But all the people I've worked with, I think, were consumed with the nature of doing the thing itself, with the song or the ensemble or the thrust of the music, the impact of the music. So anything you can do to increase your chances in that respect, you should do. And preparation is not the least of that. You should be prepared and be open and, you know, be serious. I mean, you can always party after you finish your work. You know, it's hard to mix those two things together. I've seen a lot of people try. Not many people succeed. But I think that if you want to produce, you just go produce something. And now it's so easy to record stuff, you know, and you have to kind of want it. You know, you gotta like really want it. But I'm assuming that the people there, this hypothetical would involve somebody who's already got that. They know they got to do it. And so the actual process of it, you know, you can easily learn engineering skills. You can do those on the job, learning it as you do it by yourself with an Inbox or a Pro Tools or whatever, you know, and just record music. I've seen a lot of musicians, you know, be hesitant about recording or playing or play all the time. You play on the corner, play at the old folks' home, play at the hospital, play at the school, play at the church, play whatever you can, and get your act together. You know, you need to have a goal, and you need to have a plan to get to that goal. And it's just not good enough to say, I want to do this. You know, you've got to define the goal. And and everybody in that band's got to be headed in the same direction. If they aren't, you're not going to get there. This is a pretty typical management problem, you know, in any company, in any organization. It's certainly true in a band as well. So now you can have a successful college band and 3 guys want to be rock stars and 3 guys want to be dentists, but in college they just want to play music and have fun. Okay, that's your goal. So how do you have a successful college band where you can make a little bit of money and have fun and actually, you know, get better at being a band? This can be done, and there's just lots of examples of it. If you have a different goal, then you have to have people who are all headed in that, who adopt that goal, who agree on that goal. So if it's not something as theoretical as that or as psychological as that, and it's more a question of you know, just individual, what do I do, you know, to get from here to where I want to go? Well, again, you have to figure out where you are, which is not as easy as it sounds, and then where you want to go. And you could set up metrics for yourself. By this time, I want to do this. Then I want to do this. And you've got to be able to determine if you're making progress. You know, it's almost using a business mentality to achieve a creative goal. And it's just a way of structuring your approach. But I think it's pretty simple to adopt an artist, you know, to go hear somebody you like, you love, or affects you, you know, in a positive way, or just makes you feel differently, and then do something about it. If you want to produce music, you know, you can produce live music, you can produce recorded music, you can be involved with music on many levels in many ways. But if you have this desire of you want to have something to say about how a band does what they do, then give yourself that power. You know, tell yourself, I can have something to say about this because I have something to say about this. You know, I have ideas about this. A lot of people go hear music and they don't think one thing other than whatever they hear is what was intended. And they either like it or they don't. They don't really intellectualize it. They don't break it down. So if you want to produce, break it down. Listen very carefully to each instrument, you know, and just listen. And you'll find that people play out of tune. You'll find that people don't play consistently. You'll find that people play wrong notes. You'll find that people don't have a good sense of time, or do. You'll find the good, the bad, and the in-between, you know. And then the idea is, how do you move these moving parts around? And you'll also find that at some parts of the day or the night or the gig, people play differently than in others. You know, there's nothing like, I mean, I've seen jazz musicians of the first rank play better when a pretty girl sits down. I mean, you know, well, I guess, you know, guys will be guys. So there's no telling what's going to motivate people. And but I do think that you can go to a club and you can just assume that you write a report about it, and you know, how go to a band, you know, think it through, and say to this band, I really love what you did, and then stay with that band, go see them more often. To your point, you can kind of talk to them more openly. And the idea for a band to be successful, it seems to me, is they need to do some sort of analysis of what they do and break it down into its component parts, and then and define what defines excellence in every aspect of it, and how do you get there? You know, what's the plan to get there? But a lot of bands don't do that. A lot of musicians don't do that. They don't think of it like that. But I have to tell you, I think that musicians generally intuitively know this, because they will sit in a practice room and they will work on something for 6 hours straight and maybe get up and get something to drink or eat or whatever. But they can focus. They understand method. They understand the problem of getting better. This is where I am. This is where I want to be. This is what I have to do to get there. And you're going to do it until you get there, or whatever it is that you play. And that's a very, that you can be a great lawyer if you can do that. You could be anything if you can do that. So, but you can't be a great musician unless you do that. You've got to figure out how to get that process, you know. So in a conservatory model school, for example, it's about practicing and studying with a teacher who's going to give you information you didn't have, and you listen and you try to let that become a part of you, or not. You can also learn by knowing what not to do. You know, sometimes it's great to hear a bad band. You know, it's real easy to figure out what's good, what's bad about it. So if you hear a great band, it's kind of overwhelming. It's like, wow, you know, you can't even bother thinking about it because they got you feeling so strongly. But so it's not a bad idea to go hear some bad music occasionally, just for practice. You know, that's a good question. That's a hard thing to know, and such an easy thing to screw up, because You know, it's just downright insulting to ask for another take if you can't determine why you're doing that. Now, that's not to say that you can't have intuition, you know, but you have to have paid some dues to be able to afford intuition, to be able to justify it. Like, I'm not quite sure, but I think that it might be better if we did that again. And this time, let's slow it down just a hair, because I think it's a tempo issue. You know, and tempo can make all the difference in the world. And it's amazing the changes that a slightly faster or slightly slower tempo will make. You know, it's almost like the groove, you know. If you got it, you got it. It's like, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. Now, the way I do it is I live in the live room. I don't want to be in the control room, because in that room there's managers and girlfriends and people talking, and technicians even if you keep it a closed session, it's still, there's this double thing of glass between you and them, and they're talking, and you can't really hear everything that's going on. But that's where the action is. Now, so I hire a great engineer, and by the way, that's the key, to hire great people. You know, if you're going to hire a studio band, studio musicians, you get the very best people. You want to win the World Series, you hire, you know, the Boston Red Sox or whoever won it last time, and you just get the best people, and you really have to screw it up to lose. So so you listen to the musicians. If I sit down in the live room and I don't say anything, my theory is, don't say anything unless you've got something to say, and if it's working, don't say anything. So, except, hey, that's great, you know. But if it looks like that you have a problem, then you can talk. But you've got to know what you're getting at. But if you listen to the musicians and you give it time and you're patient, patience is a virtue. And in the recording studio, it is a necessity. I'm the most patient person in the recording studio. In my life, I'm the least patient. But in the studio, you have to be patient. Just wait. You know, people will tell you things if you wait. And you can also pick up. So if the band is playing a song, generally speaking, there's going to be somebody in there that says, I want another one, you know. And you have to have been paying attention very closely to know why they might want another one. Like if you watch the drummer while he's playing, you can see when he misses what he wants. He's trying to do something he didn't quite get to. So you know why he wants another one, even though nobody else even saw it or hears it. So, you know, you can see, you know, and sometimes you go with that, sometimes you don't go with it. You kind of pull them back from it and say, that didn't matter. The feeling in that was so strong, that groove was so heavy, it doesn't matter. Now you can fix things too. You can fix the bass part easily. You can usually fix guitar parts easily. You can fix everything except the drum part. That's hard, you know. But so, you know, you listen to the musicians. If they will kind of get their own weight going. There's nothing to be lost from doing another take. You know, but it's just some time that you've lost. But also, if you ask for another take when you're wrong about it, you know, Eric Clapton made that record From the Cradle, and the theory was we're not going to do any overdubbing, right? But the practice of it was they did 18 takes of every song, you know. So I'm not sure about that, you know. If that's really, I mean, I'm not sure about the advantage of, you know, I'm doing it one take because I want to be real. Well, but 18 takes is not real. So better you overdub, you know. Better you just fix the part you screwed up. So I don't want to, you know, Eric Clapton's a great artist, and that record's a great record. And by the way, that record caused a lot of record companies to wake up to the commercial possibilities of the blues. And as a result of that, I was able to make deals for a lot of older blues artists with major companies who would never have gotten those deals, because he kind of showed there was commerce to be had. And I had a chance to tell him that. And he said, and he was very appreciative of hearing it, but it's true. And that's another thing, you know. I mean, for me to I got to work with a lot of artists who were underpaid and underappreciated. And so my theory was make them a really great record with new material if you can get away with it. It's hard to teach new material to intuitive artists, but you can do it. It just takes time. But if you make a really solid record that reflects them absolutely, you know, I've always wanted the records to be representative of the artist. This is an authentic representation of who this artist is and what this artist does at the highest level. You know, that's the goal for me. And then it's real. And I believe in authenticity. I think authenticity is what we all seek, and we all can kind of intuitively identify. If something is authentic, we know it. If it's not, if it's fake, we know that too. So, at least in my world. So that I try to go for the authenticity, and then I try to go for making them a record that I know is I know what the market is. You know, I'm not making a record to fit the market, but I'm aware of the market. And the record company pays me to be aware of the market. You know, they need to make money on this. That's what it comes down to. So they love music too, but if they don't make money, the lights go out, they don't get to make any more records. So you kind of have to balance that idea of art and commerce all the time when you're making a record. And so I'm a little bit off your question, but the thing about the second take or the third take is if it feels right, it is right. You know, then it's just a question of, are there any mistakes, the things that we need to fix? And there may be just little things. I did a record with Etta James, and it was the first time she told me this, that she'd ever sung live with the band. And this was after this was 1990 something, so she'd been around for a long time, 40 years, making records, and I couldn't believe that she'd never sang with a band before. It doesn't really make sense to me. That didn't add up to me. Although singers often overdub parts and other tracks, it didn't make sense that she would do that. So I convinced her to sing with the band, and it was a tricky thing because that record we were recording. It was a jazz record, and it was her first jazz record where she would sing jazz repertoire. And it was mostly ballads, and she just, you know, she took super standard songs. My Funny Valentine, my God, I mean, how many girl singers does it take to sing My Funny Valentine? Apparently all of them, right? So, so when she said, I want to sing My Funny Valentine, I thought, oh no. And yet she did, and she made it her song. It was so great. But the point of the story is that we were making the record the first day, and the piano, I noticed in the second tune, and my engineer turned to me and said, what do you think about that piano? I said, I'm not thinking about the piano. He said, what do you think about it? So I started listening to the piano. I said, holy crap, the piano sucks. And I'd played the piano before when I came into the date, and I felt it was sharp, you know, but it was consistently sharp. You know, it's like almost like it had been tuned to A444 or something. But at least it was internally in tune. But basically what it was it just sounded like crap on tape. And we changed the mics around. But a lot of studio pianos are played so much that the hammers are beat to death. And so they get this very metallic, thin sound. They don't have the resonance of the overtones is lost. So the tonality, the tone is lost. And pianos are so different and so finicky. Everything affects pianos. So I stopped the date, and I said to her, I'd ask her to come in the dressing room, and I can remember kneeling down in front of her because I was so scared. And I said, Etta, I have some bad news. And she said, what? And I said, the piano is not good enough. The piano's not as good as you are. And she said, well, I really want to sing. And I said, and I really want you to sing, but I can't replace the piano part. We don't have the part. We don't have the isolation of it. So I really don't feel comfortable going forward on this. She says, what are you suggesting? I said, let's postpone the date until tomorrow, and I'll get the best piano. And I'd threatened the life of the studio owner already to get me the best piano. He said he had the best piano, and I believed him, but I know better, you know. But he was a big-time guy, so I figured he knew. He didn't know. So she said, "Well, you're the producer." So I took the rap. I spent $15,000 that day or whatever, 20,000, and I had to blow it off. But I had to pay the musicians and I had to pay the studio, even though they screwed up in a sense. So the next day, it's a 2-day tracking date. So the next day, we had one more day to track a record. Well, I want you to know, I repositioned the people in the room. I made it more living room-like. It was a big, huge studio. Got rid of the overhead lights, put up some lamps, made it more of a living room setting. Comfort, comfort, comfort. Lots of flowers for the singer. You know, other things, you know, make it very special. And get the chair just right, you know, everything's right. And she sang all the songs in 6 hours with the band, and that was that. And the next day we recorded one song with her and the guitar player, and we fixed 23 words, I remember that we counted, in the whole record, where she would just punch in the word. And that was it. So we made the record that won a Grammy and sold 250,000 records in 6 hours. And that's because everything was right. And it's because the musicians knew that if I'm going to cancel a record date because the piano is not good enough, they gotta respect that. And so when they came the next day, they were ready to go. There was nothing in the way, you know. There was no, I didn't have to say, "Can I get your attention, please?" I had their attention. So it became a classic record.
What record is that?
Mystery Lady. That's the reason that record is so good is because it's all one thing. It is completely and utterly consistent. There's not one thing out of place. And I'm sure that the reason that is because it is one thing. It all happened in 6 hours. You know, it was everything was read, everything was just on the verge of peaking. You know, they say in a performance that you don't want to rehearse it too much where you peak in the rehearsal. You want to rehearse it just before you peak, and you peak in the performance. That's tough. That's really, really, really hard. But I think conductors will tell you that. You know, you've got to get it to the point where it's just about there, and bam, then it happens. And when music happens and it's magic, it's incredible. It's life-changing. Doesn't happen every time. Doesn't happen on every record. In fact, I think a lot of reasons that jazz is not so popular is because of a lot of bad records. You know, but if you listen to Kind of Blue, there's a record that's perfect. There's a record that's very consistent. The John Coltrane Ballad record, very consistent. You know, I don't know how long that was. It couldn't have been more a day or two that record was made, but it's just completely consistent. It's just beautiful. That's another desert island record right there, the Ballads record by Coltrane. Patience is one. Musicality, I think, helps. You know, I'm not really a Quincy Jones type of producer, even though I'm a musician. I'm not a producer who goes in and shows people what I want, because most of the people I worked with first were jazz guys. They don't care what I want. You know, what I want I've already expressed in the pre-production, and it's really basically a concept or a group of songs or musicians that I think would be interesting. You know, and you look at the body of work. So I think you have to have a love for it. You have to have a love for the music and for the history of it, and you have to have a respect for the process, and you have to have a respect for the outcome. That you know what you're doing is going to affect people, and you'll never meet. You know, maybe long after you've left the planet, somebody's going to hear this music and it's going to change them or affect them in some way. If you have that knowledge and that respect, then it causes you to be a humble person. You know, that humility is an important concept, and especially when you're making music. It's like it's almost a religious thing. You know, it's you know, it's great fun. We have great fun in the recording studio, but that's because we already know this. We know that what we're doing has the potential of being important. And so I think that humility, patience, musicality, preparation, you know, business, where you take care of business. You know, you don't leave any detail undone. If you have you have to have a very strong sense of detail, and you have to have an absolute ability to finish, to close. You know, even though they say you never finish a record, you just stop working on it. And there's a certain truth in that. But in actual fact, you have X days, X money, and you've got to finish it. And it's got to be wrapped up in a nice, neat little package. Here's the mix, here's the finished product, here are the credits, here's everything you need to go to the next step, manufacturing or design. And I even write a little marketing memo. And I try to be completely aware of the fact that there are hundreds of people that are going to spend their time and their lives dealing with that so-called product after you've finished with it. You have to have respect for those people. You can't give them crap, and you can't give them something that's half-baked or that has not been thought through because you didn't do your job completely. So you have to have that kind of respect for the process and for the people that you're dealing with, and for the money. You know, you can't, there's nothing wrong with the fact that you've got to make money from doing this. It is art, and it is an emotional proposition, but it's also a commercial proposition. Because if you don't sell it, you're not going to make any more of them. So the best way to be true to art and to be true to the power of music is to make sure that you can sell it, you can make money from it. Then you can do it again and make more of it. I mean, I don't understand the concept of art for art's sake. The art for art's sake thing is, you know, in a sense, philosophically, I believe in art for art's sake. We don't live in a philosophical world. We live in a world of commerce, and you have to be attuned to that. So the art, if you respect the art, the best way to continue to make the art is to be able to monetize that result. And you know, it's an exchange. I'm going to give you everything that I've got as a musician and a producer, and you're going to give me $5. And if enough of you give me $5, then I can make another one of these things. And if you like what you heard, then, and if it affected you, then you're gonna the $5. I mean, yeah, here it's better than a McDonald's, you know. So take the money. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with the idea of that exchange. I think it's an essential part of it. You know, art does not exist in a vacuum. It does not exist in a practice room. It does not exist on a piece of paper that nobody sees. It exists when it goes out there and engages people. And when that happens, there's usually some sort of commercial connection going on. That's just the way it is, you know. So we don't do what we do because of that. That is something that happens as a result of what we do. And there's nothing wrong from making a profit from creating art. Could I survive in the world of now? Well, I would assume that if I were the 24-year-old law school graduate that wanted to be in the music world but didn't quite know on what level, that I would be doing the same. I would go about it in the world of today in the same way I did, which is entrepreneurial, you know, determined, curious, you know, willing to do whatever needed to be done. You know, there's certain guiding principles for me, and one of them is if you see something that needs doing, you do it. And so when I got to work for my boss, my first boss, I remember one time he asked me to take his Mercedes limousine to get the oil changed, and I did. Didn't think a thing about it, except this is an awfully big car. And I came back, and his secretary was very upset with me. She said, "Why would you do that? You're a lawyer." I said, "What's that got to do with it? I'll stand on that car and change it myself. I know how to do that. I have no problem with that." And that's the way I was, you know. What do you want me to do? You know. Now he asked me to do a few illegal things that I didn't do, like surreptitiously tape a conversation. I can't do that. And so I didn't do that. And he didn't like that. But what can I say? You know, I mean, I just couldn't do that. I don't think that's right. But I don't have a lot of stories like that where I was asked to do something that I couldn't do or shouldn't do. I mean, I just kind of conducted myself in a certain way. People didn't ask me to do things like that. You know, I mean, I got asked by drug addicts to buy them drugs, which I wouldn't do. But I'd give them money for it, which is almost as bad. You know. So it's like not like I'm perfect or anything. And it's a problem when you're dealing with somebody who's got an abuse problem. And I put a couple of guys in drug rehab, famous guys that you would know, that I won't mention. But you know, it's like you got to do it. You got to help people, and some people can't be helped. You know, that's no doubt. But if you conduct yourself in a certain way, and I would advise you in your careers to conduct yourself in a way where you keep your integrity. You know, if somebody gets the idea that you'll skim money or divert money or whatever, all the different games you can play in the music business, that's the way they're going to think of you, even if that's only 2% of what you've done. You know, so you just can't do that. You know, you got to tell the truth. You got to help people. You got to give. You know, you give because you're a giving person, not because you want something back. You care because you're a caring person, not because you want somebody to care about you. You love because you're a loving person, not because you want to be loved. And so if you conduct yourself this way, then the things will come back to you. You know, it's gratifying to me. I mean, it's hard to believe that I've gotten to the age that I've gotten to, but here I am. What can I do about it? So, but it is gratifying to me that even at this age, I've got friends I've known for 30 or 40 years in the music business who we started out together, you know, and we all lived through it, and we came through it, and we did things together, and we created things, and we facilitated the creation of things. And it's a positive feeling. You're a member of a community of creativity and art that informs your life and gives it meaning, you know. And I think there's a search. I think everybody's searching for meaning. That's a pretty good way to find it. So for me, music, musicians, art, now the education of those people, that gives my life meaning. And I don't have any trouble with that or even identifying it, because I can go home tonight and put on a record that I know will make me understand why I am on this earth, you know. So that's it. I don't know what else to do, you know. So feed the artist, you know. Take care of the artist. They'll take care of you. Because, you know, my first job was on the 27th floor of number 1 Rockefeller Plaza. I went right up there, and I was, my second day on the job, Ron Carter's coming down the hall, and I'm going to listen, and my boss said, take Ron Carter into the listening room and play him his test pressing. Now, 2 weeks before that, I was buying Ron Carter records or listening to him play with Miles Davis. And now all of a sudden, I'm going to play him his test pressing? You know, it was mind-boggling. Now, Ron Carter to this day is a good friend of mine. I get emails from him all the time. He sends me veggie bags to microwave my vegetables in, because he wants me to eat more vegetables. Right? I didn't know he knew that I had a vegetable problem. But apparently, he probably just guessing. Everybody does anyway. But Ron Carter is a great guy, you know, and a great artist. And I mean, it's like I grew up to work with my heroes. When I was 12 years old, I was homesick one day, and I got my parents' mail, and there was a thing from the Capitol Record Club, and so I filled it out, and I didn't know what to order. I didn't know anything about anything, except I just didn't know. So I ordered a George Shearing record, a Miles Davis record, and a Count Basie record, because they looked cool to me or something, and I knew I wanted instrumental music. And I grew up to produce George Shearing. I grew up to re-record The Birth of the Cool with Jerry Mulligan, because he wrote most of the music. And I grew up to record the Count Basie Band. Now, you got to admit, that's pretty weird. I mean, I lived my dream. I didn't even really have a dream. I just had an inclination, you know. I had a feeling about music. That's what I wanted to do. And then to go from that to that, I mean, who else gets? That's a very big deal to get that journey given to you, or that you're allowed to take that journey. That's the luxury that we have. We're very fortunate people. You know, some people are not that fortunate, but that's that. If I could do it over again, there's a million things I would do differently. But I can't list them, but I just assumed I could do things better, you know. But as far as being lucky, being fortunate, you don't get luckier than me. I mean, I really was lucky. Now, my friends might point out, you're not just lucky, you're hardworking, you're smart, you're honest, you're thoughtful, you care, all that. Well, that's all true up to the smart part. But I do work hard, and I do care, and I do feel like I'm a privileged person, and I'm not about to abuse that. Although I guess I have abused it from time to time, but no doubt. But you know, I still have been very, very lucky, and I've tried to make the best out of every opportunity. So, you know, it's a beautiful world, right?